Good morning, and thanks for joining us for another installment of the Melissa Institute's Innovations in Violence Prevention and Treatment series. I'm Etionio Aldarondo, the Executive Director of the Melissa Institute. For nearly 28 years, the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment has been a trusted source of scientific information on violence prevention, safe communities, and mental health worldwide. Today, more than 100,000 people from over 130 countries have benefited from the Institute's educational resources and its trainings. In addition, we frequently consult with and provide information on violence prevention and treatment to diverse organizations locally inside Florida and across the country. It is really an honor for us and exciting to see that for today's event, we have registered participants from across the United States, as well as from Canada, India, and the United Kingdom. Welcome, all of you. And those of you who are new to our network, really a special welcome to you. Hope to see you more and more in the future. Please know that the Melissa Institute's trainings, like the ones that you are about to see, and the educational materials accessible to our websites and YouTube channel are available for free. All we ask in exchange is that you use these materials to support your efforts to repair the world, and if your situation allows it, that you consider donating to support our programs. Today, we have the pleasure of bringing to you Dr. Daniel Jolley, Assistant Professor of Social Psychology at the University of Nottingham in the UK, who will present important research by his team about the links between conspiracy beliefs and violence. A timely and urgent topic of discussion worldwide at this moment in history. You can find details about Dr. Jolley's distinguished academic trajectory in the event page bio, as well as in his the web page link, and we're going to provide it for you. So now, without further ado, I leave you with Dr. Daniel Jolley. Thank you for being with us, Daniel.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for that great introduction, and indeed for taking the time to come and think about the psychology of conspiracy theories. So the topic will be, as you would expect, on the link with conspiracy theories and violent reactions. So definitely a timely and important topic, but of course one that we need to tread sensitively with. So without any further delay, I just thought I would really kind of push the point of who I am, so you kind of know who I am before we kind of get started. So as mentioned, I am Daniel Jolley. I have been interested in the psychology of conspiracy theories for quite some time. I first got interested before it was really a topic. When you would say, oh, I'm looking into why people believe in conspiracies, people will often say to you, oh, well, that's a bit of a weird topic. Why would you be doing that? Whereas today, the reaction's very different. It's seen to be, rightly so, a very important topic, a timely issue, something that we really need to learn more about, which has really kind of highlighted the change in kind of narrative and rhetoric with regards to conspiracy theories. And I do think COVID-19 has played a role there, in the sense of people being able to see the impact of these kind of rhetorics on kind of real world behaviors. And I think that's definitely what's made policymakers, governments kind of also look towards these issues. And of course, it's not just about violent extremism. There's a whole range of conspiracy theories and impact from these beliefs. So my research, therefore, broadly is trying to understand why people believe in conspiracy theories and what harm those actually have. So of course, this is also dabbled into the impacts of these beliefs on people's behaviors, in particular violent reactions, which is all based around me being a social psychologist. So I, in my research, employ what we call quantitative methods. So I'm really interested in looking into, surveys, understanding people's beliefs and how they may be linked with different behavioral outcomes. So that is kind of me in a bit of a nutshell. So I can sort of see people commenting. I'm sure you can obviously see as well in the chat that there's a whole range of different people, from academics through those who are in law enforcement, which is really, really interesting to see. And again, even a teacher involved as well, which I think is really, really great to be involved. So as mentioned in the chat already, I have kind of three aims that I really want to kind of talk about, which is, for you to, at the end of the session, really be able to articulate why someone may be drawn into conspiracy-inspired violence, to think and analyze about the conditions that may strengthen the link between conspiracy beliefs and violent reactions, and then to identify different routes that could be used to try and think about how we address this type of violence. Now, we'll say up front that this area of research is kind of very much ongoing. It is, I would say, the link between extremism and conspiracy beliefs is in its infancy. So in a way, we haven't got all the answers. We're certainly learning more each day. And definitely when it comes to the intervention part at the end, it's mostly ideas or kind of initial evidence towards ways that we can help. So it's very much a kind of a new kind of topic. So what I'm keen for us to do here is just to kind of think through some of the issues and what we know so far, and use it as kind of a way to kind of think about what's the next step. So I'm basically saying I haven't got all the answers. I'm certainly interested in kind of learning more about this topic and trying to kind of, in the end, develop concrete interventions, but it's very much kind of a work in progress. So with no further ado, I just wanted at the start to think about, okay, a bit of a snapshot into the psychology of conspiracy theories. Now, it's quite a wide topic, so these are just kind of things that have been pulled out that I find interesting. But I think it's underlining that conspiracy theories are persuasive. They're believed by many different types of people across the whole world. And, it's worth noting that they can flourish in younger populations too. It's not just that they are reserved only for adult populations. Rather, these beliefs can also emerge, particularly around teenage years. Because, of course, these individuals don't exist in a vacuum. Rather, they have questions and desires and thoughts about the social system, which, of course, can lead them down a journey of conspiratorial thinking. So it's more just underlining, therefore, that it's not just adults. Rather, many different types of people can be susceptible to believe in conspiracy theories. And that popularity could stem from the idea that conspiracies promise to satisfy important needs that we all have. Now, we all want to feel secure, be in control, and we all also want to maintain a positive image of ourselves and our group. And a conspiracy theory almost kind of promises to satisfy each of those goals, because these needs are typically frustrated during times of social, or what I'm kind of thinking more towards, some current research, towards personal crises. So these are things that can make us feel uncertain, make us feel out of control, threaten our image of ourselves and our group. So, these could be rapid political change, terrorist attacks, could be virus outbreaks. Things that societal level that can kind of frustrate our needs, where we end up in a way in a kind of spin to try and search for meaning and make sense of that particular troubling event, which a conspiracy theory often can give a more of a kind of a concrete answer to what is happening during that moment of crisis. Oh, the reason COVID is happening is because of this. The reason this attack happened is because of that. It offers some reassurance, or at least that's what it promises to do. But in actual fact, researchers show that they're not always actually that appealing, that satisfying. I mean, they're appealing, but not satisfying. Rather, they can impact citizens in very significant ways. Here it can impact vaccine uptake through to pro-environmental behaviours. And what we'll talk about today is, links with violent extremism. So how the beliefs about the world and how people are involved in these plots and schemes can lead you to act in a very kind of negative way that may impact yourself, but also wider society. So therefore, a bit of a nutshell is conspiracy theories promise to satisfy our needs but potentially don't actually end up doing that. Rather, they can impact us in many significant ways. But I think before we really get into some of the research on extremism, it's really kind of get into the crux of what is a conspiracy theory. Now, I'm sure you all have different ideas of what a conspiracy theory actually is. It's, there's different definitions, for example. But what we kind of worked with is that there are typically 3 ingredients involved in a conspiracy theory. You need to have a protagonist, an actor, so who did something, an action, what did they do, and a motive, why did they do it? And it's the interaction between these 3 ingredients that really kind of make a long-lasting, plausible conspiracy theory. Now, as kind of trying to get our science out to the wider world, with some colleagues, we developed what we've called the conspiracy kitchen, whereby we have these 3 ingredients, as you can sort of see on the picture here with the chef outfits. And in each box, we have a range of actors or actions and motives, and the guests pull out different ingredients and kind of make their own conspiracy, which kind of leads into a discussion around which one is more plausible, which one isn't, and why that to be the case. Now, so some of my colleagues at University of Kent also turned this kitchen into a kind of an online interactive exercise. So I thought I would go through some examples here with you now, just to kind of get you thinking about what a conspiracy theory is. So after each, I have 5 examples. And after each example, a poll will appear on the screen, and you'll ask you to indicate how plausible you think that theory is. And we can use that as part of our discussion. Just to also flag, I'm afraid, because I am British, these examples are British examples, so please do forgive that. Those from England will certainly be happy with that, but just to flag, they are all British examples, just because I am British. So the very first one I have here is teenagers are buying cryptocurrency in order to win the space race. So first poll, therefore, is, do you believe that conspiracy theory is plausible? You've got, I say so, yes. Yeah, it's plausible. Not at all. No, but get in there. So teenagers are buying cryptocurrency in order to win the space race. So far, you've got 6 people saying yeah. So 40% of people saying yes. 47 people are saying not at all, and 13% so far saying get in there. So if obviously we were in person, I'll be saying to you, which you feel free to put in the chat if you want, but I'll be saying why do you think that to be the case? For me, I would say no, because I don't believe teenagers are a powerful group. So for a conspiracy to really make sense, it really has to be a perceived powerful group who is the actor, but the protagonist. And here, in my mind, teenagers are not powerful groups or a group. Also, teenagers involved with cryptocurrency, with the space race, the interlinking between these 3 ingredients just doesn't really make sense. If maybe it was the government or scientists, I may lean into it more. But because it's the teenagers, I would say not at all, because, if you saw that, let's say on social media, you saw that on X or on TikTok or whatever, there's no way you would think, oh yeah, teenagers are doing that. It just doesn't have that plausibility. So another example is the British royal family are cancelling the TV show Love Island to confuse people. So again, we've got another poll. Do you think this one is a plausible conspiracy theory? So we've got a yes, not at all, no, but get in there. And I'm not sure if you have Love Island in elsewhere in the world. The UK, it can be quite popular. I must say I've not watched it in a while, but it's something that certainly exists. So far, got 62 people saying no, 29% saying yes, 13% saying no, but get in there. So the British royal family, yes, that is a powerful protagonist. That makes sense. The actor makes sense. To confuse people, not that sinister, but okay. But cancelling the TV show Love Island, it's just a bit weird. Like, why would the royal family be doing that? It's just weird. So, whilst the actor makes sense, I don't think, again, it's a plausible conspiracy because it just doesn't really make sense. Third example. British politicians are using Baby Yoda to take over the world. Again, got a little poll. Do you believe this one is plausible? Not at all. Obviously, yes, not at all. Get in there. So again, 61% are saying not at all, and some saying yes, some saying no. Now, British politicians, yes, powerful group, tick, agreed. Take over the world. That's an absolute sinister motive. But using Baby Yoda, for me, that's where it falls down. If it was, British politicians are involved in plots and schemes to take over the world, I'd be like, yes, that is a conspiracy theory that can make sense. But the Baby Yoda, the action, just doesn't fit what kind of the motive and the protagonist are about. So again, if you saw that online, I don't think you would really think much of it. You'd be like, that doesn't make much sense. So whilst it has, the key ingredients of a conspiracy theory with the actor, the action, the motive, it just doesn't really fit together. Now, one more example, which memory serves me, could be the last one. The last one. The British government is putting secret messages in movies to deceive the public. Again, another poll for you. So we've got a yes, not at all, no, get in there. Let's give it a few moments. So about 40% are saying yes, 20% are saying no, and 35%, obviously keeps saying, but 30% are saying no, but get in there. I'm agreeing with the yes, because I think this has the kind of key elements of, what would be seen as a plausible conspiracy. You've got the British government, which is a powerful group, putting secret messages in movies, which is a motive, action that kind of makes sense for them, and a motive to deceive the public. These all things kind of merge together. And indeed, I think I would say also like the majority here, that this fits that kind of key kind of plausibility argument. It's slightly weird to think, why would they be involved in messages? But nonetheless, it kind of feels, that plausibility feels kind of, to be on the right pages. So here, this task is very much showcasing how, it can be quite difficult to get a conspiracy theory that, fits the kind of elements of what this theory, what conspiracy is, and that kind of makes plausible sense. So in a way, the fact that we have so many that really kind of tick the box is quite, a testament really to the creativity, arguably, of being able to get these things to one place. But hopefully it kind of brings us to a point where we can think about, what is a conspiracy theory? It is where you point the finger at a perceived powerful group, where you kind of blame them for wrongdoing in society, something that they did, and for a motive that often is something that is self-interest and, is kind of sinister, typically that benefits that particular group. That is kind of the crux of what a conspiracy theory is. It's you kind of pointing the finger and kind of going against the kind of shared reality of our society, whereby we look towards, science and facts and we go, well, that is just not right. The consensus around climate change or vaccines is just not right because the government are doing X, Y, and Z, or scientists or whoever it is. This kind of boils down to what a conspiracy theory is. But I think it's just worth noting, which Cameron Douglas, a scholar, highlights in some work, that whilst conspiracy theories are often thought as addressing governments, and indeed that's maybe kind of where your gut went, was it's about governments doing bad things, they could accuse any group who's perceived to be powerful. And, events often and issues often have multiple perceived conspirators involved. So to take the second example, climate conspiracies about climate change, people can accuse scientists through to the UN, the Democrats, the government, the oil industry, amongst many other different examples. So I think it's worth noting that actually many different groups of people can be seen to be conspiring. And it's that perception of power that really matters. So governments, absolutely powerful, but so can many other different groups. And a few of them are in front of us here. So it's really acknowledging that there's kind of that diversity that exists, which I think is super interesting. So when it comes to thinking about, what is the harm of conspiracy theories? Well, we've talked about that actually they're persuasive, and that's probably because they promise to satisfy the needs that we have, typically during a social crisis or indeed a personal crisis. But it can also impact how we behave in society. So this study here, I think, is really interesting in that it looked at the role, how it impacts kind of societal level things. And it's found that people who were exposed to conspiracy theories, so this is people who were given information about conspiracy theories, reported in a questionnaire having less intentions to engage in normative actions. So what we mean by this is that they were less likely to say that they would vote or engage in legal demonstrations. So here you can think about, it depends on who you're voting for, right? And, there is context that plays a role here. But typically, if you perceive the party in power to be conspiratorial, in the sense that you don't trust them, well, it can impact your intentions to engage in that election system. Because, you will feel that your voice doesn't matter. You'll feel powerless. And this powerlessness can inspire you to not want to engage in that sort of behavior. Of course, the context is if you believe the person who maybe is in the alternative party, who may be elected, actually is part of a group that you identify with, that is going to call out the conspiracy, for example, that can actually increase your intentions to vote. So it does depend on who the party is and what's happening. But typically, it does decrease normative actions. But of note, it can increase non-normative intentions. So this means it can also increase intentions to refuse to pay taxes and committing violence against people or groups of people in perceived power. And this is the part that I think is super interesting in the sense that it can decrease normative behaviors such as voting, but then increase non-normative such as, pulling back from taxes and wanting to go after people who are perceived to be conspiring. So you can really kind of see the nuance happening with someone who has these sort of beliefs. And in particular, the example here of committing violence against a person in power is what we're really going to focus on in this talk. Because, of course, there has been multiple examples of conspiracy beliefs being associated with different real-world events that have sparked violent reactions. So, for example, in recent terrorist attacks, many manifestos have referenced conspiracy theories, such as the Great Replacement Theory. Now, this theory claims that Western culture is threatened by a harmful cabal, arranging from different groups, from Jewish people to Muslims, and it's shifting the demographic favour towards non-white immigrants. Now, there's lots of nuance of variations with this conspiracy theory, but this is kind of very much the kind of essence of what this theory entails. And so it's been highlighted by different organizations that this kind of rhetoric exists in manifestos, and indeed the FBI not too long ago highlighted how, in a report of looking at lone terrorists, showed that a good percentage discussed or consumed information that was about conspiracy theories. So there certainly seems to be a kind of thought in the media and kind of government bodies that there could be some kind of link or tension between these two areas. And indeed, there has been a developing empirical base starting to provide some empirical evidence supporting such an association between conspiracy beliefs and violent reactions. So some really early work highlighted how people high in conspiracy thinking were more supportive of political violence and favoured gun ownership laws. So here it is a correlation between those facets. Kind of talk about your study again, but participants who were shown to be more supportive of violent extremism, i.e. committing a violent attack, when taking the perspective that a few powerful groups control society and these control politicians. So this basically means that in an experimental study, some participants thought about a few powerful groups controlling society, whereas some other participants thought about society experiencing very little kind of powerful groups controlling society, or indeed, no, that does not exist at all. So there's three different groups of people. And what they found was that those people who thought about a group of powerful people controlling society had higher, were more likely to support violent extremism than those people who didn't think about that thing. So it's starting to provide some kind of more kind of robust experimental evidence of the link between thinking and believing in a conspiracy and then being more supportive of potentially these violent kind of reactions. So as I say, it's kind of that emerging link between these two concepts, which I think is super interesting. So the bits that I wanted to cover next really kind of dabble down to why are conspiracy beliefs linked to violent reactions? So, look back to that research that highlighted how those who thought about a conspiracy led them to say they'd be more violent. Why would that be the case? What context is playing a role? And importantly, when does that relationship actually kind of happen? Because of course, someone who has these beliefs doesn't mean that they're going to go out and actually act in this violent way. So what is happening between the belief and actually going to go and do these violent reactions, having these violent reactions? So I want to really talk about three different contexts. I'm going to talk about arson attacks. I'm going to talk about non-normative political action, and I'm going to talk about violence towards, in particular, Muslim immigrants. So I would say, really important topics. Now, just to flag at this point that some of these things, some of the research that I'll talk about is published, and you will notice that from the date on the slide. Some of these things, the odd one or two, are things that either are just going through to be published or I'm still working on. And I will try to flag this up when I come to those studies. So it just means giving a bit of a warning that some of these things are still being worked upon. But I thought it was really important to kind of still talk about the research that is ongoing, and hopefully that will be interesting, but just to really flag that it's still therefore ongoing. But that's kind of but we'll come to that a bit later on. It's more so with interventions. So the first context is COVID-19. So as mentioned, conspiracy theories flourish around moments of crisis in society, which resulted, therefore, in COVID-19 being a breeding ground for such theories. Ultimately, people, therefore, are trying to make sense of the complex and distressing events that are unfolding. So I'm sure if you can kind of think back to early 2020, when this first kind of came into our lives, and how that may have made you feel. I certainly felt, a bit uncertain, kind of a bit powerless, wondering what is happening? How has this happened? What is going on? I'd really, have that desire to kind of want to make sense of that particular event, which therefore meant that a lot of conspiracy theories were elevated as a way to try and make sense of what is happening in that moment. And, some included the idea that COVID-19 is a result of 5G. Now, did anyone kind of see that rhetoric at the time? Can you remember? If you can, please pop it into the chat. Do you kind of remember what was happening during that time? Did you ever see that kind of conspiracy theory? Did you also see any consequence of that conspiracy theory? I know it kind of was a worldwide thing in the sense of it happened in the UK, but also Australia, across Europe, North America. So I do expect you probably have been at least exposed to this idea in some capacity. But does anyone kind of comments in the chat of any consequence that you may have seen from this 5G? So someone put absolutely, 5G led to protests and damage to property, which again was also not isolated just to the UK, but indeed happened across the world. And just to kind of flag that early in the pandemic, telecommunication masts were damaged or destroyed in arson attacks, and engineers were subject to violent and physical abuse for being involved with this. So there's a picture on the right of one of these pylons being attacked, and the irony was, it seems that most of these attacks actually happened not on 5G masts, but rather on just other masts. But a question arose, was this linked with conspiracy beliefs? So at the time, there's a surge of these conspiracy beliefs about 5G. Around early 2020, the PM at the time, our Prime Minister, had to mention these types of conspiracies as part of his daily briefings he was doing at the time, which co-occurred with these attacks happening. And indeed, just by looking at the media, there was certainly the links between conspiracy theories and violent reactions. So here it was just highlighting that these terrorists have set alight in Australia, where in the UK it was highlighting how police are investigating a possible arson attack based around the rumours that 5G causes COVID-19. And indeed, by looking at just the news on Google, you can see it from Canada, from Ireland, people, attacks on 5G linked to conspiracy theorists. So me and my colleague, we were interested to think, okay, the media, journalists, the government are linking these concepts, but actually, are they actually empirically linked? With someone who has this belief, would they actually be more supportive of this type of violence? And importantly, to think about why. So the context here, therefore, is kind of a societal crisis. People are in crisis mode, trying to understand what is happening. Could therefore this crisis lead this sort of behaviour? So we sought to ask those questions. And one thing that we thought that could be associated was anger. We thought, could conspiracy beliefs be linked with violent intent because of feeling angry? So anger is usually listed where individuals perceive an entity as, threatening or inflicting harm to oneself or one's group that means something to them. And in turn, anger can inspire people to want to readdress that wrongdoing, to want, to motivate them to want to go out and confront and attack that emotive target. So we therefore propose that, believing in this conspiracy that 5G is causing COVID may make you feel slightly more angry. And this anger in turn may make you to want to go out and to kind of, stop this happening, to kind of confront that anger invoking target. But we also thought, well, actually, the link between anger and violence is kind of complicated. It's clear that anger does not always provoke violence. There's kind of an interesting kind of interaction with kind of personality, kind of beliefs, all happening with one's emotion. So one factor, therefore, we can also considered was the role of paranoia, because researchers have previously found that violence was a more likely outcome when individuals experienced paranoia and were angry. So this suggested what we call a moderating effect between the two, that anger and paranoia may kind of interact together, which therefore could kind of lead someone down the journey of wanting to target this anger-invoking target. So if you kind of imagine it like this is kind of a diagram that we put together, was that conspiracy beliefs would be linked with anger, and then anger would be linked with paranoia, which therefore may make the violent reactions even more strengthened. It could be this interaction that is really important, which I think really kind of explains what could be occurring, in the sense that it's not that you have your belief, you go out and act on it, rather your belief interacts with your emotions and how you see the world, which therefore can make someone slightly more extremist here. So just to kind of take you through some of the measures to kind of get you under the bonnet of the research, we asked about COVID-19 5G conspiracy theories, such as the real truth about the link between COVID-19 and 5G is being kept from the public. We then also asked them their intentions and justification for different measures of violence. And the one in front of you here is that we gave people a very short article that highlighted damage being caused in the UK at that particular time. So the research actually took place just a week or so after these attacks occurred. And we asked people, do they find the events described to be justified? And would they engage in these sort of behaviours themselves in the future? So being likely or unlikely. We then took a measure of their anger. So in particular, I'm feeling mad. And we also took a measure of their paranoia. So, someone has it in for me. So what we found was belief in these type of conspiracy theories was associated with justification of real life and hypothetical violence, and also a greater intent to say they would behave in a very similar way. So these things were associated. We looked at, why could that be? And we found that conspiracy theories were associated with feeling more anger, which in turn was associated with more violence towards that specific target. And of interest, we found more in evidence of the when, that the conspiracy-connected anger is more likely associated with violence for those reporting higher levels of paranoia. So our model was kind of supported by this kind of correlational data, that these beliefs were associated with emotions, in turn associated with one's intention, which was kind of magnified under these feelings of paranoia. But it's worth noting that we also measured, as part of the study, a more general notion of conspiracy theories. So what I mean by that is here we very much focused on belief in 5G conspiracy theories. But there also exists what can be called sometimes a conspiracy mindset or generalized conspiracy theorizing, which basically is one's perception of the world, that they digest it in this very conspiratorial way. That they have this generalized conspiracy belief where they see kind of conspiracies that exist kind of out in society, which enables them to kind of digest information through this lens, which means that you were able to kind of tap into a more general notion that you believe conspiracies kind of exist and people are conspiring, which of course predicts real world conspiracy theories. So, someone's general conspiracy beliefs that these things exist would predict whether someone believes in 5G conspiracy theories. But we also therefore measure this general notion. And we also measured general violent behaviors. So in the study, we focused just on 5G, their mass and arson attacks, but we also asked people about, in general, would you be more violent? And we found, therefore, a general tendency to engage in conspiracy theories was associated with willingness for general violence, an effect that was explained again by anger and more pronounced for those who were paranoid. So it's not just that these are reserved for the 5G conspiracy beliefs, rather these patterns seem to emerge in general, for general conspiracy theories and general violence. Again, just to really kind of underline that here, I think it's just an example of a context. So COVID-19 being a very kind of crisis, kind of evoked context that led to kind of sense making, which therefore may have inspired these sort of beliefs. But this data is based on cross-sectional work, so it's all really based around relationships and being able to test this model just with kind of cross-sectional data. So we can't assert cause and effect here, but it's certainly an interesting indication of what could be happening behind the scenes, that it's not just as simple as the belief leading to the outcome. So, whilst beliefs can be associated with these intentions, behaviors, less really is known about how and if intentions actually translate to actual behaviors. Because of course, what I talked about there was based around intentions to engage in this violent way towards the engineers, etc., etc. But what else could be a risk factor? So here we talked about contexts of societal contexts, but what else could be a risk factor? Here, some work I've done has looked into the subjective state of loneliness. So one, you could argue that this maybe is seen to be more of a personal crisis, something that is happening to the individual at the individual level. Now, loneliness has been associated with increased aggression and justification of violence across different types of studies using different types of experiments and designs. It's also been shown to be linked with high levels of political and social extremism. So in a way, one's feelings and one's loneliness can be linked with these kind of violent reactions. And it's thought to be because lonely individuals may be susceptible to joining extremist groups, because such groups promise to satisfy and restore a sense of belonging and purpose. So you feel lonely, you may be looking as a way to kind of, feel a sense of connection, feel belonging, that you may be drawn in to these groups. But of course, such groups ask for violence from its members to achieve its goals. So it's thought that in a way, the lonely individuals could be quite vulnerable in that moment, which this kind of extremist group, when it comes to the normative context, to be acting in this violent way, means that they could be kind of interlinked. Also, it's been shown in some research that loneliness and conspiracy theories are positively linked. And actually, I was at a conference in the summer where a number of psychologists were presenting on their work, and one showed some data that over a long period of time, they measured loneliness and belief in conspiracy theories. And what they could see over someone's life course across different participants is that as loneliness increased, so did conspiratorial beliefs. And as loneliness decreased, so did conspiratorial beliefs. So it seemed to be from their data that younger people experience more loneliness and older people experience more loneliness. Whereas in the middle, it kind of dipped a little bit. And they were able, really interestingly, to showcase that conspiracy beliefs mirrored that same effect, or that same pattern. That was more increased in the younger years, linked to loneliness, and then decreased, and then increased again in the older population. Which again, I thought was super interesting, highlighting how these things, really could be kind of associated. And the reason for that, why could they be so interlinked, is subjective loneliness threatens basic needs, such as the search for meaning, which, as we know from the other work, can lead people to engage in antisocial behavior, including joining these kind of different extremist organizations as a way to kind of, deal with some of these needs of belonging. Now, such a threat to the need for meaning and control may therefore make conspiracy theory particularly appealing. As I've mentioned several times, that when you feel out of sync, when you feel that you want to make sense of the world, that actually a conspiracy can really kind of promise to try and meet some of those needs. So as such, if loneliness can threaten your search for meaning, well, a conspiracy theory may come even more appealing. Therefore, previous research that suggests loneliness may provoke meaning sense making, which as a result may increase conspiracy beliefs and in turn, therefore, impact non-normative behaviors. So really kind of linking loneliness, conspiracy beliefs, and potentially these non-normative behaviors. Now, across 2 studies, we have tested this idea. So I'm going to show you a figure where there is some data on it. So if numbers are not for you, just try and focus on my face. But if you like some numbers, feel free to have a nosy. What we did here was that we measured loneliness, conspiracy beliefs, and non-normative behaviors. So loneliness was, how often do you feel that you would lack companionship? Now, with conspiracy theories, we measured more of a general notion of conspiracy beliefs. So not about specific things, but that general mindset, such as, I think the events which superficially seem to lack a connection are often the result of secret activities. Then for non-normative, we asked questions such as, I would commit a violent attack on a person in power, or indeed, I would refuse to pay taxes, fees, or rents to weaken the system. And what we found was that loneliness was predictive predicting belief in conspiracy theories, and in turn, conspiracy theories was linked with non-normative behaviours. So providing some empirical evidence of the link between loneliness, conspiracy beliefs, and these non-normative political intentions. I think it's worth noting at this point that the effect we found is what we call quite small, which on the one hand, yes, it's small, but on the other hand, I always think, well, okay, what we're talking about here, is just not many people kind of go and get and doing these really bad things. It's not that everyone who feels lonely and believes in conspiracies will go out and act in this violent way. Rather, it's more of a complex intersection of different things. So in actual fact, us understanding some of the kind of drivers that can lead some people towards these factors actually can have a real kind of impact on societal issues and indeed how we think about interventions. So I still think that these findings are really kind of enlightening and important, even if, it showcases they are quite complicated. So this is, again, cross-sectional work. So in study 3, we tried to do something a little bit more experimental, whereby we had people remember a time when they felt lonely or not and answer some questions. But we also included a behavioural aspect to our study. So in the previous work, it has been based around intentions, around, what would you do? But we're all interested to see, okay, what actually would someone do? So we focused on paying taxes. So in our study, participants were getting paid for their time. And we gave them this question towards the end of the study, where we said that by taking part in this study, you would get paid 75 pence and the government will be paid 5 pence. This 5 pence is our value added tax and must be legally paid to the government on all products and services, including your political reward, which is what they use to take part. However, would you like to refuse to pay this VAT? If so, you would get paid 80 pence and the government would be paid 0. Then we asked them the question. No, I would not pay the VAT in my payment and I will receive 75 pence. Yes, I refuse to pay this VAT. Now, what we found was actually those individuals who remembered feeling lonely did not report higher belief in conspiracy theories. But we did find evidence for our predictions for what we call serial mediation. This is where these concepts are linked together. And what we found was that people who remembered feeling lonely reported that, yes, they felt more lonely. And in turn, feeling lonely was associated with belief in conspiracy theories. And then of note, belief in conspiracy theories were associated with a person saying, yes, I would refuse to pay this VAT. Just some evidence, therefore, of a belief impacting a behavioural outcome. Now, we may say, well, actually, did the participant really believe they couldn't pay their VAT? Maybe, but I was certainly given no indication that they could or couldn't. It was I asked them this question and got their response. But of course, a critique may say, is it real? I would say yes, because they were part of a study and this we were told that this could be the case. So in a way, they had no reason not to believe us. But then, of course, in the UK, it is a legal requirement, as it says there, to pay this thing. So could they really think that I would, act in this kind of non-legal way? Who knows? But nonetheless, I still think it really demonstrates that intentions and behaviours are linked. And indeed, here it highlights how importantly loneliness and conspiracy theory beliefs are interconnected and may, impact political intentions and behaviours. Whereby here it's, we employ this kind of novel behavioural outcome, which was, refusing to pay taxes. So, conspiracy-evoked attacks could stem from one's states, such as loneliness, where an individual is seeking meaning in the world. And as, also loneliness can foster distrust. This distrust can also be predictive of conspiracy beliefs, which therefore could be associated with these non-normative behaviours. So I think it'd be really interesting to kind of pinpoint some of this process to try and think about how we can kind of help with interventions. By that, if it really is around sense making and trying to understand the world, is that something we can try and kind of target with interventions? Another context I'm going to talk about is the role of inequality and belief in conspiracy theories. So we've talked about context of 5G, societal crisis, context of a personal crisis, loneliness. But as we mentioned so far, of course, conspiracy theories, are invoked during crises. And economic inequality can be seen to be an ongoing crisis. Such a crisis undermines social standing and order, further making it, a fertile ground for conspiracy theories. And, it's in thought that inequality can impact perceptions of societal anomie, i.e. impact the perception that society's fabric is crumbling, which can enhance the us versus them divisions in our society. But why could this be linked with conspiracy theories is a good question to ask. And it's because conspiracy theories allow a simple explanation for the cause of inequality, and they give a powerful weapon in the fight against the outgroup. And quite a few studies now have demonstrated, both with relationships and in experiments, that inequality can increase feelings of anomie, that society is crumbling, which can then increase the belief in these types of conspiracy theories. So in some work that I'm still in the process of, so this work is very much ongoing, see that as a warning that it's not yet even ready to be written up, it's still ongoing, but I think it's really interesting, was that in a series of studies, we have replicated other work that was highlighted inequality is linked with anomie. But of note for this talk, we've demonstrated that anomie is in turn associated with non-European immigrant conspiracy theories. So kind of linking towards the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. And in turn, conspiracy beliefs have been linked with anti-immigrant sentiment. This includes the likelihood of being violent towards non-European immigrants. So we found this, as I say, across a series of studies. Inequality linked to anomie, linked to conspiracy beliefs, which is linked with different violent responses. Now, we've measured this in cross-sectional design, but asking people's inequality, asking about people's inequality. So particularly we looked at economic inequality, anomie, conspiracy beliefs, and violence. But we've also had people engage in an experimental task. So it's been used quite a few times. And this world that people are asked to be involved in is called Bimboa. Basically, when participants come into the experiment, they are told that they are being put into one of two groups. Either they are starting their new life in this fictional country called Bimboa at the bottom, where they are the worst off, or are starting it at the top at number 6, where they are the best. Now, during a series of tasks, they need to make decisions about their life, such as you need to buy a house. Now, for those individuals who are at the lower, the worst off, can only buy 1 or 2 stars. For those who are at the top, number 6, they can buy a whole range of different houses. And what we found was that individuals who we were made to feel that they had high levels of inequality, this directly impacted their perceptions of anomie. And in turn, again, this was linked with conspiracy beliefs and non-violent reactions. We also actually found that individuals who were shown to be in the lower group, who had high inequality, and were exposed to conspiracy theories about non-European immigrants in Balboa, reported higher levels of violent reactions to that group of people. So here we're developing an evidence base that inequality really can foster anomie, which in turn is linked with conspiracy beliefs and violent reactions. And we're finding that in experimental work, where we both manipulate inequality and conspiracy beliefs. which I think is particularly really important and really highlights again the kind of contextual background that we are in. But just underline it at the end of this part that work is still ongoing. So it's not out there anywhere. It's the first time I've talked about it. It's still truly ongoing. But I think nonetheless, it's really kind of important to kind of talk about these issues. At this point, I'm just going to have a nosy at the Q&A to see if anything's picked up any questions. No, it's all good so far. A few things I'll pick up at the end, it's fine. I just wanted to know, obviously, what I've talked about so far is thinking about the context of when these things may happen, i.e. societal contexts, inequality, personal, such as loneliness. But when do these links actually become more strengthened? Some really interesting work by these two colleagues found that, again, that general conspiracy theorizing is positively linked with violent extremist intentions. But they found that this link was subject to several individual different variables. So what they mean by this is that they looked at perceptions of self-control, law-relevant mortality, and higher self-efficacy. And what they found is that the relationship between beliefs and violent reactions was more pronounced for those who reported lower levels of self-control, held weaker law-relevant mortality, and scored higher in self-efficacy. So again, highlighting my point that it's not just you have these beliefs and you act, rather it interacts with your personality here. But to give kind of an example, with legal cynicism, they measured it with items such as sometimes it's necessary to ignore the rules and laws and to do what you want. So an individual who is more likely to believe in conspiracy theories and more likely to see that, you should ignore the rules, were more likely to indicate a higher intention to engage in violent extremism. So it's the linking of the beliefs with one's actual, in a case here, individual difference variable. That kind of came together, linking to this violent intention. But a question we have here is, okay, if that's about individual differences, maybe more personality almost, what about political ideologies? Now, this work is almost published. My PhD student actually submitted this back to the journal today, which is under R&R, which is called a revise and resubmit, which is where the reviewers have read the work and they liked it and had some comments. And we've addressed those comments and we've now resubmitted the work back to the journal to say, look, we've now addressed the reviewer comments. Do you now like it? So hopefully it goes through. But our question really was around political ideologies and how this could impact conspiracy beliefs and violent reactions. In particular, we focused on a factor called social dominance orientation. So social dominance orientation is a personality factor that refers to how much a person favors hierarchical group-based social systems. So who should be on the top and who should be on the bottom. So a person with high SDO would support the dominance of one group over another despite inequality. And further, SDO has been shown to contribute to intergroup aggression, such as extremism and gang-related violence. So here, SDO could be a real kind of important factor to consider in the link between conspiracy beliefs and violent reactions. So what we call here, could it moderate the effect? Could it interact and make the effect stronger? So, it's thought, therefore, that high SDO, the more likely individual perceives disadvantaged groups as threatening the advantaged group, which therefore is likely linked with violent reactions. But to turn this into our study, it's plausible that people with high SDO may be more likely to justify the use of violence, particularly towards a disadvantaged group who are thought to be conspiring and thus seen as a threat. So if I see this group as a threat, I'm more likely to want to have support violence towards that particular group. So the belief and the ideology could interact together. Now, the group that we focused on here was Muslim immigrants. So it's been suggested that, an increase in right-wing extremism is influenced by Muslim conspiracy theories, in particular around, in a way, the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, whereby this conspiracy theory plays into the fear of a plot by a disadvantaged group to threaten, in our case, British values and resources, i.e., of the advantaged group. So therefore, this conspiracy theory that paints this disadvantaged group as plotting against British people is likely to particularly appeal to people who have higher SDO, who have really kind of value that kind of hierarchical thinking in our societies. That a conspiracy that paints this group as threatening will really go, for that person who has SDO will go, yeah, that really kind of makes sense to me. So it's that belief and that kind of ideology coming together to really kind of make this, this effect. So here, this was an experimental study where participants were exposed to conspiracy theories about Muslim immigrants in the UK or not, where we measured SDO as the moderator, i.e. makes the effect stronger, where we predicted that exposure to conspiracy theories about Muslim immigrants would increase the use of violence towards them, but only for those people who had higher SDO, i.e. the exposure linked to their political ideology will be the thing that kind of gels together. Just to kind of show you an example, participants read about 200 words or so that presented the conspiracy theory that Muslim immigrants were involved in different organisations, were plotting against the UK. And to say what we thought was this manipulation would appeal to people who have higher SDO, who really kind of value that hierarchical thinking in society. So just to kind of show how we measure this thing. So we have exposure to conspiracy theories. With SDO, we measured it with items such as an ideal society requires some groups to be on top and others to be on the bottom. And then here we asked violent willingness via, in general, I'll be willing to use physical violence to fight Muslim immigrants. So we're expecting that the exposure with someone's political ideology to really kind of go ahead and make someone more likely to support this kind of violent reaction. And that is exactly what we demonstrated. We found a positive interaction between SDO and the experimental condition, whereby those who had higher SDO found the experimental condition to be more appealing, arguably, in a way that for those people who had high SDO and were given conspiracy theories, they reported a high willingness to engage in this violent behavior. So here on the slide, it's the black dotted line. You'll see that it's much more higher than any of the other lines. So this black line is high SDO. So here it's demonstrating that intersection between political ideology and this exposure. Now we found this effect across 2 studies, so we're able to replicate it twice. And it really demonstrates that the links between conspiracy theories and violence could be really conditional on individual differences, i.e., thinking about ideology and political worldviews and how these things really kind of come together. Also importantly, we also provide experimental evidence of intergroup exposure on violent reactions being conditional on SDO, i.e. favouring this hierarchical group-based thinking. So here across the studies that I presented, both my own and others, there's kind of an emerging empirical base that, conspiracy theories are linked with violent reactions in different ways. And by being able to have different experiments and designs, we can kind of triage it together to see actually there's a base building that these things do seem to be interconnected by, in a way, one study doesn't do it all, but instead the cumulative across the study so far, I think kind of tell kind of a really interesting story. And for me, it kind of underlines that it is this interactional pattern, that it's not just simply you have the belief and you go and act. Rather, it's quite complicated. It seems to be based on individual differences, on your political ideology, on maybe how you feel, your emotions. Which leads to this, the last section of my session so far before the Q&A, which, interventions to target the consequences of conspiracy beliefs are timely. Potentially what I've talked about so far really highlights how, these things are linked. So the consequences, therefore, can be quite dire towards different groups of people. It can be the government, but also, as demonstrated from the work so far, it can also be different minority group members. So, there are potentially different ways that we can try and think about and target conspiracy beliefs and violence. One could be stricter law enforcement. So it could be stricter laws. Two, it could be societal interventions, such as community level support. Or it could be C, psychological. So it could be around skill set building. So I'm going to put a poll up now just to see your perspective, to see which issue do you think is the best route to try and address conspiracy-invoked violence? Is it societal interventions, community level? Is it stricter law enforcement? Is it psychological around skill set building? Is it a mixture of some, or is it actually all of them together? Just kind of get a feel for what you're thinking of this issue. So far, one person has said societal interventions, whereas everyone else seems to be going towards everything. And a couple of people, 3 so far, saying it should be a mixture of some of those things. Okay, that's super interesting. So the things I want to talk about are societal interventions and psychological skill building. Now, I'm not suggesting that laws can't have a place. It's just not really my expertise. I just think it's interesting to think about things that we can do on that level. So definitely, if you're from law enforcement here, please put something in the chat and do a Q&A that you think, if you agree with this, that you think could be something in law that could be really interesting to think about in our Q&A later. But what I'm going to focus on, as I say, is just the more psychology things. Just a little warning, I'll give you loads of these warnings, but this particular part, is the most underdeveloped part of our research base. I'm presenting some ideas of things. Some things are things that are still ongoing. Some things are just ideas. So it's the bit that isn't there yet. But I think it will hopefully offer some fruitful thought for both you and me. So the first thing is something that is kind of societal level, maybe. It's around community identity. So a community identity refers to the feeling of belonging to a group with whom you share an emotional connection. High levels of community identity have been shown to be linked with better mental health outcomes regarding quality of life, anxiety, and also stress. It can also help with need for fulfillment. Where individuals feel more identified with their community, they feel less vulnerable and more likely to be able to cope with uncertainty. Now, you may be thinking, therefore, all the things that Daniel has talked about is kind of linked here, like feeling anxiety, need for fulfillment, ability to cope with uncertainty. These are things that are kind of are risk factors to belief in conspiracy theories. And importantly, it's worth noting, therefore, that being part of a community has been shown to reduce loneliness, which therefore may also safeguard against the development of conspiracy beliefs. So it may be that a community helps with feeling less vulnerable, helps with uncertainty, makes you feel more connected, i.e. less lonely, which therefore could safeguard against the development of conspiracy beliefs and as such, violent extremism. So the way we can measure community identities, items such as, I see myself as a member of my local community. Now, this can have these real positive benefits. Of interest, we have found some initial correlational evidence that community identity is associated with lower levels of loneliness, which in turn predicted lower belief in conspiracy theories. So the first evidence that identity, loneliness, and conspiracy beliefs were interconnected. I think it's worth noting, actually, there was no direct correlation between identity and conspiracy beliefs. This only happened through loneliness, in the sense that community linked with loneliness, linked with conspiracy beliefs. Also, we didn't find any links with these concepts and non-normative behaviors. So it wasn't seen as an intervention from this data that impacts conspiracy beliefs impacting non-normative violent behaviors. But for us, for me, it's a really kind of interesting, promising first step by being able to showcase the links with identity, community, just say community, loneliness, and conspiracy beliefs, with the potential of future being non-normative behaviors. So this is part of leading into another project where we're going to investigate these things further. We're going to look into how different types of communities can be linked with reducing conspiracy beliefs. But we're also going to do this longitudinally, in a longitudinal design. Basically means we're going to have people complete our survey at different time points to see, does time 1 predict time 2? So feeling part of a community, does that predict lower beliefs in conspiracies 3 months later? To try and find some more kind of robust experimental evidence between these two concepts. But nonetheless, I think it's interesting to highlight how community, feeling part of being with other people, may reduce your loneliness, may make you be able to cope with life's craziness, which, may be linked with lower beliefs in conspiracy theories. So that's the first thing, is community identity. Something else that have come up is around, in a way, kind of skill set building, kind of resilience, self-compassion. Comprises of 3 interconnected components: self-kindness, common humility, and mindfulness, where basically the individual turns compassion onto themselves. So it's things such as, I try to see my failings as part of the human condition. Now, self-compassion has been shown also to improve psychological well-being, improving satisfaction with life, decreasing anxiety, and providing resilience to cope with differences. So again, you're probably thinking, okay, these are all things that are risk factors for conspiracy beliefs. Could this offer any kind of safety against the development of conspiracy beliefs? And indeed, I asked that same question. And again, of note, we found some initial evidence of self-passion being associated with conspiracy beliefs and, kind of to my surprise, and violent reactions. Here we found higher levels of self-compassion were associated with lower levels of conspiracy beliefs, which in turn were associated with lower non-normative behavioral responses. But as I say, initial evidence that is just cross-sectional. And at least to my knowledge, it's one of the first studies, at least in my program research, that have really looked at something that reduces non-normative behaviors. And here, it could be down to, if you think about it as resilience, being able to deal with societal crises, being able to kind of cope with threat in our society. And in this case, it's around putting that, compassion into oneself and how that could be a safeguard. I'm still working out the next step of this research, as I think it's super interesting to find these correlations between them. And I do want to do more on this. But for me, I see it as skill set building, i.e., how to kind of regulate how you deal with life stressors, and putting it on inward and kind of being good to yourself could be one route to do that. Just this idea. Some other work that has been found by other people very recently, as in a sense it was published just a few weeks ago, is looking at how we can try and help with some of the moderators. So the study I mentioned earlier found that there's a link between rule breaking and conspiracy beliefs and violence. That violence was more pronounced if an individual believed in conspiracies and were more likely to want to break the rules. Poon et al. Recently manipulated rule breaking. They have some participants think about the importance of following rules, i.e., the benefits to increase security. Otherwise, you had some other people think about rule breaking as control, so showing it can lead to undesirable outcomes such as loss of freedom. So some people thought about the benefits and some thought about the undesirable outcomes. It demonstrated that those who thought about following the rules and the benefits had decreased levels of aggression for those who are also exposed to conspiracy theories. So if we look at the diagram here, you'll see the word conspiracy. So for those participants who were exposed to conspiracy theories and were told that rules actually lead to undesirable outcomes, reported higher levels of aggression. You'll see the black bar being higher levels of aggression. But they also found that if you were exposed to conspiracy theories and made to think about the importance of rules, i.e. the benefits, it actually was shown to decrease your levels of aggression. Here, you can see it's actually decreasing in that grey box. So this is some evidence of how, if you're able to kind of deal with some of the factors that strengthen this effect, i.e. if you think rules are to be broken, actually it can make you more aggressive, and indeed that could also be linked to extremism. But here it demonstrates, at least with aggression, that if you really highlight the importance of rules, even when you're exposed to conspiracy theories, that can actually reduce your aggression, kind of reduces the impact of that conspiracy theory. So again, I think it's super interesting, and how it kind of leads into thinking about molding some of that kind of individual difference factors. That, okay, if someone has this belief, but if it could try and help with the factor, i.e. thinking about perceptions of rules, thinking about someone's ideology, thinking about changing how someone sees society as kind of high and low groups, and actually trying to change some of the things like that, may break the link between conspiracy beliefs and violence. And in this case, demonstrating the link between conspiracy beliefs and aggression was broken or reduced for this manipulation, which I think is a really neat study. Another idea is around emotional regulation. So as I mentioned in some of the work with 5G, we demonstrated that individuals are more susceptible, and particularly if they felt paranoid and also felt angry. So in a way, it's how someone responds to the emotion that they feel in more appropriate ways, which may reduce the likelihood of violent responses. So for example, by targeting a conspiracy-triggered emotion, i.e. anger, with emotional regulation strategies may neutralize the impact of the conspiracy belief on that violent reaction. So in a way, the conspiracy may make you feel angry, yes, but it's how you kind of deal with that anger that really matters. Rather than going out to want to go and punch the engineer, if you can emotionally regulate, maybe that will help with how you deal with that kind of feeling. Now, there is some promising research in this area. So it has been linked previously in published work with maladaptive coping strategies, i.e. if you're more likely to engage in avoidance coping, for example, you act as though it didn't happen, you're more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. But in my PhD student, we were keen to look into a range of other types of emotional regulation strategies. Now, this actually is about anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. So not about general conspiracy theories or 5G. It is about anti-vaccine. But nonetheless, I still think the findings are relevant here. And we looked at different strategies, such as adaptive. So, for example, focusing on planning, that I think about how to change a situation. But also maladaptive, such as I keep thinking about how terrible it is what I've experienced. And what we found was that adaptive, i.e. focused on replanning, was linked with reduced anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. So actually demonstrating someone who emotionally regulates by refocusing was shown to reduce their belief in conspiracies. But we also found that maladaptive was also linked with conspiracy beliefs. So if you think about how terrible things are, that can be shown to increase your belief in conspiracy theories. So really interesting findings of how kind of adaptive emotional regulation can be maybe a safeguard to these beliefs. So thinking towards anger or what of violence here, and in the case of anger, would it be fruitful to explore refocusing strategies around anger? So could you imagine, for example, that if someone's able to deal with anger by refocusing anger, they may have the conspiracy belief that makes them feel angry, but if they can then refocus that slightly differently, that could break the link with maybe potentially leading to violent extremism. Now, that is just the idea based on this, this work with anti-vaccine conspiracies. But again, we've talked about here so far around community, thinking about skill set building, but also thinking about how one deals with one's emotions. Now, the final bit, and literally got 2 slides left, is more broadly thinking about social policy. So I've mentioned in some of the work that's been conducted already, and the work that I'm doing right now is around perceived inequality, which can also be called relative deprivation, whereby you see yourself as disadvantaged compared to another group. And it's argued that it's not necessarily the relative size of the comparison gap that matters to most people, but rather it's the why the inequality exists in the first place, whereby a relatively small gap that reveals one's undeserved situation will be more powerful motivator in comparison to a large gap that is seen as legitimate. So in a way, the why this exists is really important. So therefore, when we think about ways to try and deal with this, I found some suggestions from quite a while ago, actually, but by Smith here, to be really interesting, whereby they argued that reducing the income gap between groups is likely to be more effective in addressing the adverse impacts of relative deprivation than reducing the range of incomes between groups. I.e., if there's a choice between reducing either the income gap between groups or the range of incomes between individuals, well, then actually the income gap between groups should be more effective. Because, that would show that, that the inequality shouldn't really exist, but rather if we're going to bring the gap closer together, i.e. eliminate that gap, that would be better than reducing the range of incomes. And similarly, supporting policies of opportunities supporting policies that support mobility are more effective at addressing relative deprivation than one-time efforts like raising the minimum wage. So rather, if we're trying to deal with these inequalities rather than doing these kind of short gaps, this may actually deal with this kind of problem of relative deprivation, which of course may safeguard against conspiracy beliefs. So in a way, this is kind of policy level of how we kind of think about inequality and deal with these things that are in society. And in particular in the UK, but I'm sure elsewhere, inequality is certainly an issue of our time, and it's only going to get much more crippling, in particular in the UK, whereby based on the literature, we will see, therefore, conspiracy beliefs to increase, and from what I'm showing so far, how that could be linked with extremism, because, of course, the context is kind of really nurturing the idea of the fabric is crumbling. So in a way, policies really need to take into account how to kind of deal with this. And suggestions here by Smith et al., I think, are an interesting way to think about this issue. But I think just to kind of move away from what I've talked about so far, actually, is this work here proposes that we should move away from what works and question and towards what works for whom, in what circumstances, and how. So this is actually in relation to violent extremism in general. But I think actually this could be related to belief in conspiracy theories, in particular with links with violent extremism. Indeed, in the context of risk assessments, it's a challenge. The challenge is to understand these factors that may be relevant to the person's motive towards an involvement in terrorist activities, i.e. the persons in front of you. That someone's journey into being violent towards that group, whoever that group is, will be different. It may be governed by loneliness coupled with anger. It may be because of inequalities coupled with personality variables. It may be it may be one. The journey will be quite different, which of course is very challenging when it comes to risk assessment, because how do you rate someone's risk when there's not really a profile of who is more likely to act in this violent way towards this group of people? So I do kind of lean into the what works for whom in what circumstances and how kind of idea with extremism and how that could play a role with conspiracy beliefs, which in a way ends the talk on like the notion of it's complicated and actually it's quite individualized. And I think that's probably true, actually, because of course, thankfully, these events don't happen all the time, but when they do happen, they are very detrimental. But in a way, being able to understand some of the psychology and what may draw people to these things means that we can develop interventions that during risk assessment could be poured upon depending on that individual person's needs. It may be not that giving people, strategies around emotional regulation will work for everyone. But for someone who really is dealing with dangers of anger and how to control it, it may work for that individual. So a summary, I bet you're kind of glad I'm going to stop talking. The summary is, there is consistent evidence of links between conspiracy beliefs and violent extremism across all different types of studies using different designs. And the contributors are complex, but may include different situational factors, the context, i.e. inequality breeding enemy. And these can also be, kind of societal level, but also can be about personal things, such as feeling lonely, emotions, anger, which is more pronounced for certain people. It can also be based around political ideologies and individual difference variables. It's probably a bit of it, a bit of it all, some of it, none of it. It depends on the individual who is at the center of this, whereby it could be loneliness and anger, or it could be the inequality breeding the loneliness linked to anger. It's a mixture of all these factors. But interventions directed towards trying to address these levers, I think, are really important. So, for example, trying to think about how we address loneliness, for example, through community identity. Tackling some of the moderators. So that study looking at how highlighting the role of rules and how that seemed to reduce the link between conspiracy beliefs and aggression. So, in a way, dealing with some of the individual difference factors, i.e. the emotions, how people see the world. But, in a way, conspiracy beliefs are always going to be around. They've been around since the start of time. So potentially trying to deal with removing conspiracy theories is never going to work. Rather, potentially how people think about how we deal with them could be around resilience, around community, around being able to be in a place where something bad happens that you haven't necessarily got to draw on a conspiracy theory to explain that particular bad thing. By the fact that you feel resilient or you feel connected to others around you, that you feel okay in that uncertainty, which is easier said than done. So thank you very much. I believe we've probably got less than half an hour or so thereabouts for questions that you may have. So please do pop them in the Q&A function or indeed in the chat. If you have anything, any ideas, you want to connect afterwards, please get in touch via email or indeed Twitter X. I'm more than happy to kind of hear from you. As you may probably would have seen, the latter part about intervention is a lot more difficult to kind of get your head around. So any thoughts around how that could be implemented in your work, that'd be really cool as well to learn. I'll stop sharing my screen so I can kind of see what else is happening, and you can see me as well.
Wonderful, Daniel. Thank you very much for this journey in helping us understand conspiracy beliefs and the relationship to violence. As you were talking, I was thinking about how illiterate we all are when it comes to conspiracy beliefs and conspiracy theories. I was thinking about and how uncomfortable we are, at least in the context of the United States, talking about it. I mean, for obvious reasons, it's such a politicized kind of like term, and the majority of us, even highly trained folks, like most of the ones who are participating in this chat and this conversation today, we don't feel comfortable going in those conversations because we don't seem to have reasonable solutions or strategies to engage others in meaningful conversations about things that we know matter so much. So I suspect that's a problem that is going to be, you and others are going to help us improve our ability to deal with this as we move forward. But it is what it is right now, that you are 10 times more articulate about this than anybody else that I ever heard. And it's a pleasure hearing you talk about conspiracy beliefs and the relationship to violence this way. With us also is right now is the scientific director of the Melissa Institute, Don Meichenbaum, and you see it on camera there. And
Yeah.
Don,
Well,
yeah.
Daniel, thank you for that informative and stimulating discussion of the parameters. Imagine, Dan, that I gave you access to the 700 conspirators who attacked the US Capitol, right? Who had the beliefs that led to that actual violent behavior. You know, and this is a golden population. I wondered, what is it that you would do? What questions do you think we should ask of the perpetrators of that criminal act that they engaged in?
I suppose in a way, it'd be good to kind of tap into some of the things that I've talked about, i.e. political ideology, i.e. perceptions of hierarchies, thinking about emotions, thinking about resilience. So you would predict, based on kind of the evidence so far, that an individual who have engaged in that act will maybe have these conspiratorial beliefs, but I suspect they will feel that emotion that is linked with the perceptions of wrongness, i.e. the perception that they are doing worse off than other groups, i.e. that relative deprivation. Because of course, when I talked about inequality earlier, it's also important how someone perceives themselves. So in a sense of objective inequality isn't really a great predictor of violent extremism. Rather, it's the perceived inequality. That is the kind of nuance here, because someone may be involved in inequality, but it's until they realize that, until they perceive it, until they kind of want action on it, that's when it kicks in, which means that therefore someone could be seen to be in a high power position. Are you part of a majority group or whatever, but perceive their group to not be valued? So actually, I suspect that relative deprivation linked with emotion and linked with the idea that, you know, some groups are better than others, I suspect will be the undercarriage, kind of the fire under that extremism. I suspect, though, there will be different nuances in the sense of some people will kind of got to that point quicker than others. Some people may be drawn along because of the group that they were in the sense of, you know, when you feel lonely, you may look towards other people who maybe feel that, you know, my group and myself is not valued. And then you're then kind of inspired by those around you in a sense of, you know, those extremist groups that the normative context is maybe to act in this violent way. So then they go and act in this violent way as part of that group. Because I always propose that, you know, the individuals who maybe are out with signs that says, you know, COVID is a hoax, or indeed go and, you know, attack the Capitol like this, I suspect in that moment they felt quite empowered. I suspect they actually felt, you know, really part of a community, and that they would
I have one other suggestion.
Yeah.
That might be interesting from a
Yeah.
research point of view. And that is to study the people who put together the conspiracy theories.
Narrative,
actually see the strategies that they use, because they have a feel for who's gullible and who might be a candidate to follow them. So in fact, if you studied the conspirators, you know, and there are some prominence, and you could actually access over a period of time the way in which they went about communicating, they are implicitly doing in the formulation of their messages what you're doing in your research. Okay. So it would be interesting for you to do a content analysis of the people who create conspiratorial theories. You know, how do they decide who the victim is, who to name, how to play up loneliness, how to play stand by you, I'll be with you, you know. So,
and I suppose is it on purpose? The word is it motivated by that, or is it just
but
coincidence?
they're walking social psychologists.
Not like that.
You know, and the question is, what is their theory of who is potentially vulnerable.
Mhm.
So if you ask people to
Mm.
create conspiratorial
Mm.
theories
Mm.
and then compared it to what the experts do,
Mm.
that would be highly instructive.
That is so interesting because yeah, is it coincidence or is it on purpose that they phrase the rhetorics in a way that deals with sense making, that offers a certainty for individuals who may be searching for that? Is that just coincidence or is it actually a motive by some hidden agenda? So in a way, is it a conspiracy and a conspiracy? So like, I really like to point out walking social psychologists. I never thought about
Yeah.
it in
Well,
that
you know,
way.
yeah, all you'd have to do is follow Trump's statements that they're good people on both sides, you know, or we'll
Yeah.
do, I mean, just
Yeah.
look at the language that they use,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sense of a group.
Yeah. Yeah. Which we know from this work will hit a nerve almost. It'll be like, well, yeah, when someone says that and they already feel that their group is undervalued, and you know, and people say, well, we
Yeah,
should
but
do
I
X,
mean,
Y,
you
and
can
Z.
go to political figures across the world
Yeah,
and see how they do it.
yeah, yeah. It's really nice.
Once again, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Just to pick on some of the questions in the Q&A, someone asked about, have you used any assessments to help see pre-existing history of violence and fed into conspiracy theories? I have never done that. I don't know any work that has, in the sense of the work that we've done so far seems to be what is the impact of conspiracy beliefs and what kind of psychology kind of draws someone in. But actually, it's interesting to see history of violence, perpetrating violence, how that may impact how someone thinks about and engages with a conspiracy theory. I feel that it would do that in the sense that if you've done it before, you probably do it again. So I suspect it would be an important context to include. It just happens that the work I've done so far hasn't done that, but I think it'd be good to do that. Someone else asks about paranoia. Paranoia. So, for example, I can imagine communities of color in the USA may believe someone has it out for them, has it in for them, and it may necessarily not be paranoia. Rather, it could be acknowledgement of systematic racism that impact their daily lives. So that's such a fantastic question, and I totally agree with that. And in a way, it's when you think of some of the examples I've talked about before, so like related to deprivation, emotions, etc. Another one is prior experiences, i.e., I've been discriminated against. Now I know in the context of sexuality that gay males who have experienced discrimination based on their sexuality reported higher belief in conspiracy theories. We know that also people of color, in particular in the US here, have indicated higher belief in conspiracies if they are the subject of police harassment. Also, I found in some work that experiences of bullying also is linked with belief in conspiracy theories. So for me, this really demonstrates that it's not just isolated to being discriminated against because of your color or sexuality, but rather it's if you have been a victim because of a real conspiracy where someone was out to get you, in particular in this bullying environment, that can lead you down to digest information through this kind of very sinister lens where you are quite cynical of other things. So, you know, this trust of others' institution is based on real life experience, which maybe that's then interacting with your ideology, your emotions, your whatever, but it's also that based on that true experience. So sometimes when I think about interventions that say, you know, oh, just make someone think more clearly with critical thinking, i.e., think about how you digest information, I sometimes think, well, in a way, someone could be digesting that information based on their real life experience. They're using their, you know, their lived experience to digest that content. So to say think more clearly may not work for that individual, whether it's because of discrimination because of sexuality or indeed because they've been bullied. So I think there's definitely an interesting line to think about how we have conspiracies that exist, that are true, that have happened, versus conspiracy theories that are things that we've talked about today, whereby the evidence suggests that actually it's true that climate change is happening, vaccines are safe, these groups aren't doing these bad things, that it's that kind of mergence between the two of how you have someone be able to go, yes, that bad thing happened, but kind of build that trust back in the system and institutions to go, okay, that's a conspiracy and that's a conspiracy theory, which I don't feel we've got there yet either, in a way, that is kind of another context of real life experience that has been looked into with conspiracy beliefs, but that's not been looked into with violent extremism, I should add. So, for example, we know bullying is linked to violent extremism, but I've not done any work that links it all together. But theoretically, it certainly makes sense why these experiences kind of come together. Someone asked about stricter laws may impact the publication of falsehood that lead to discrimination. That's interesting. So it's also about how someone actually, I suppose, like, what law is this? Like, how does it like actually play out? What does it look like? I suppose the laws, I struggle to think about what what it actually would be. And indeed, you're right that you don't want also, you don't want also people to be asking questions, legitimate questions, to be seen as, well, that's violent extremism, because it's not. Like asking the question at the start of COVID, is COVID-19 caused by 5G? Is a question to ask. You then get the information from the scientists and experts and see what the consensus is, and then you debate and go through that evidence base. That then informs your opinion. But someone who's conspiratorial will ignore that base because they will discredit it, because they have an overriding suspicion of that information. So in a way, if the laws are super strict, someone asking these questions may be deemed as, we shouldn't be asking that, and indeed be prosecuted, whereas I don't think that should be the case. So laws, I think, are really difficult. Probably the reason why I've leaned more into the kind of community and whatnot ideas. What else? What do we know about the motivations of people promoting conspiracies of various types and targeting different groups of people? Which sort of kind of leans into kind of what Donald was saying around the groups and how they form, and whether it's something on purpose or not. We know less about those who promote and make these conspiracies. Typically, the work that has been conducted is in those who have these beliefs and are kind of how it impacts them. So I think there's definitely a kind of a evidence-based, in a way, to build, in a way, looking at the walking psychologists, as Donald really nicely said, and trying to see what these narratives actually kind of look like. Because in a way, to someone who kind of motivates and makes the conspiracy, is that different? Is the psychology different from them to someone who believes it? Like, is there nuances in that group? I suspect there is, but I don't really know any work that has looked into that. Someone's asked, can you address the issue of correlational versus causal links when looking at both why people believe in conspiracies and the resulting behavior? The research is always correlational. I think that's absolutely true, that the overwhelming amount of research in this area in general is correlational research. But there is kind of nuggets of, or sprinkles of experimental work with the odd bit of longitudinal. So for me, it's kind of taking this overarching viewpoint and putting the correlational with experiments with kind of this longitudinal work together to try and kind of digest what are the kind of similarities between all these three different ways of looking at it. And it seems to be to date that they're all kind of uncovering these links between conspiracy beliefs and these violent behaviors. But I think it's undeniably that we need more kind of work on this. We need more time and effort. We also need more work looking at the behavior side. So other than the tax example that I talked through, everything else is intention based. So would you intend to act in this violent way? So, in a way, it'd be really good to get people who have been violent, maybe in the capital, versus not, and to see what's some of the psychology happening behind the scenes. Is there differences in those groups between those who have and those who haven't? So I also think the actual behaviors and the measures is also an issue that need to be addressed. But with that said, it's really hard, like, to get a real behavioral task of whether someone actually is going to go out and punch someone is both unethical and also problematic. So it's not, I suppose, that people aren't trying to do these things. It's just how you do it. It's the reason also why I leaned into the tax thing, because that was much more easier to focus on rather than having someone punch someone, for example, which is much more difficult. Have you come across a measure of the risk or dangers linked to specific conspiracy theories? i.e. some more harmful than others? Some may lead to harmful behaviors, while others are just interesting, but won't result in any action or behavior. Typically, I suppose people, as you know yourself, people particularly focus on the danger side, in a sense of focusing on conspiracies about anti-vaccine, climate change, about great replacement, which clearly have some kind of impact. But I suppose it'd be interesting to see what type of impact occurs with conspiracies about mundane things, such as believing that celebrities have died and been replaced. What does that do? Like, does believing in the moon landing have any obvious impact? My one hand says it would do, because, you know, whilst the moon landing is quite unique in that way, and like, you know, it won't impact whether I engage with NASA, for example, but it certainly can sow the seeds of distrust. And if that distrust therefore can grow into me doubting the credence of other types of beliefs and events, but that we know that, you know, believing in the moon landing can impact distrust and therefore may impact climate change, vaccines. So in one hand, actually, is it that all these things kind of link together, that, you know, it's all through this distrust that can then seep into other conspiracies. So when you have this one mundane conspiracy about musicians lying and are dead and actually have been replaced and whatnot, could that distrust seed into other things? It definitely is an empirical question. Another question, thinking about marginalized groups specifically, to what extent do you think the role of actual conspiracies against that group influence their conspiracy endorsement, and how would we mitigate the risks? I think that's a really, really great question, Megan. Yes, in a way, it's been measured in a way of discrimination, i.e. discrimination against someone because their sexuality or whatnot. But I suppose that's not necessarily been a conspiracy in particular. Like, for example, with the bullying research, it was, you know, the boss is out to get them and they're doing X, Y, and Z. Whereas, you know, there's different things that happen to groups that would be classed as conspiracy, but have been proven to be true. So I wonder if someone's life experience of going through that, how that makes them think about other conspiracy theories. Again, I think it's a really kind of important empirical question to think about how they digest. And in a way, what are some of the safeguards against it? i.e., is it building back trust? Is it about resilience? Is it about forgiveness in a way? Do these concepts kind of play a role in how people kind of think about other conspiracy theories that exist versus from their real life experience of a conspiracy? And if we learn about some of those factors, can we try and help with it? i.e., if it is forgiveness, what does that look like? What is involved? So I think that'd be interesting to think. So I think the last question I'll answer, if that's all right. And then we're done, because I think we've got 4 minutes left. Are conspiracies dangerous because of the knock-on effects? They generate anger, disillusionment, powerlessness, even if it's about aliens. Yeah, I think that's really important. That it is, I suppose it is a knock-on effect, that distrust, that anger, that powerlessness, that then kind of inspire that range of outcome. So again, is it important to try and deal with these conspiracies, or is it important to deal with how people react to the conspiracy? Because they may have the belief, and then it's how they deal with the after effects that seem to matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I wanted to share with you, as you set up an agenda that would help us understand and deal with this issue, is to find inspiration in the literature that suggests that active bystanders have an important role to play in diverting and reducing violence in many other domains, with bullying, with intimate partner violence, community violence. And so I wonder, as you move forward, if you can also look into this idea, what can we do as witnesses of these conspiracy beliefs, as listeners of them, you know, and co-narrators, in a thoughtful manner that really is
Mm.
not just dismissive, but really
Mm.
allow people to have
Mm.
live a life with dignity and
Mm.
passion and
Mm.
connectedness and so on.
Mm.
I want to thank you really a lot for sharing with us this innovative work. First time that I think for most of us, we have heard the research in this area. So thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time from
Pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
speaking from the other side of the ocean. And thank you for all the friends who joined from all over the country. I wanted to remind you that the Melissa Institute is a nonprofit organization that really endeavors to provide, science, the best of science, for the promotion of safe and healthy communities. Everything we do for free, and we appreciate that you use this knowledge to promote good in the world, as well as that we appreciate you take time and consider if it is within your means to donate, and let us know that way too, that you support our efforts. We have many resources available to you in our YouTube channel, in our website. We also have a literacy website that is chock full with wonderful information about the connection and importance of literacy to reduce violence among youth. So I invite you to use all our free resources and to download our free documents, including Don Meichenbaum's book, Roadmap to Resilience, which you can, if you go and scan there right now, you can go get it and have it and read it and participate in this. We recently also have been part of we're promoting now a new series, a legacy series of the work of Don Meichenbaum, that when you go to the website, you can also read more about it and learn about it. And it's so there are two main courses with about 10 sessions each that is a extraordinary production that all process of that Don has made available, donated basically to the Melissa Institute. So if you're interested on that and learning more about that, please follow us that way. We have a conference coming out in May 3rd on gun violence prevention research. What do we know and what do we need to know, with an extraordinary group of national leaders on the topic. I invite our local folks, our national network of folks, as well as our international audience to join us that day. Again, information will be soon appearing in our website, but we'll let you know also via email. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.